Welcome to the Third Quarter Shutout, our football podcast where we talk about all things NFL, college football, and anything else that we want to talk about related to the beautiful sport that we all love. My name's Kyle, I'm your host, and I'm joined by my two co-hosts, Joe.
Hi.
And Joe.
Hello.
In this episode, timing it off with the start of the new league year, we're going to be talking about the first 2 days of free agency, what's happened, who's gone where, and what that might mean for the future. So, to start off, we'll talk about some of the names of players who didn't leave and extended their deals at their current teams. One of the biggest names there, everyone thought possibly hottest wide receiver on the market, Chris Godwin. Potentially big offers on the table for him. Decided to stay with the Bucs, didn't go anywhere, thought going to run it back with them another year, see what happens.
Yeah, it's... I hate it. I absolutely hate it. As you can tell by the hat. But you're right, it's a 3-year, $44 million guaranteed, $66 million deal.
He got the money.
He got a fair amount of money. It can reach up to 72. We'll discuss the elephant in the room. It reportedly was the Pats that offered the $90 million to him, which, you know, I get not wanting to be part of our team. But for the Bucs, it's huge. You know, Mike Evans isn't going to be around for ages. And, you know, Godwin's a receiver one. Mike Evans is a receiver one. They're essentially just, right now at least, they're kind of in that same room as the Bengals, where we're just going to score more points than you. But their defense is still a little bit better.
Yeah, I think in that Liam Cohen system last year, he really had like the year he's been after for a few years. He's not been the premier wide receiver two for a while, like a couple of seasons since his big injury. I think last season, before he got injured again, he was probably the best wide receiver two in football. I'd probably say he was better than T. Higgins last year in the wide receiver two role. I know obviously that Liam Cohen's not there anymore, but you know the system is set up for Mike Evans and Chris Godwin to thrive. I don't know if he's going to come back exactly the same player straight away, which again might have played into his decision to stay put in Tampa. Is he going to bounce back from that injury and be exactly the player he was just before he got injured? Probably not. So I think him staying put in Tampa for 3 more years on a fairly sizable contract is probably the right move for him.
Yeah, and I think one thing that's important to know as well is almost test the waters. Granted, Godwin didn't actually test the waters because it was before the legal tampering period started that he'd re-signed. I think it was reported on Sunday that he had re-signed. But it's interesting that the Bucs are letting this get down to the wire for, you know, these number one receivers, and they're choosing to stay. Clearly, the Bucs are doing something right there. It's probably to do with Baker Mayfield. I know players love him, and you know, I'm happy for Godwin. He gets to stay where he wants, and he's just a likable player at the end of the day, isn't he?
And he's staying where he is. And you talk about consistency in QB play and consistency in the wide receiver duo that he's got going on with Mike Evans. But there's not actually a great deal of consistency within the Bucs offense. They've got a new offensive coordinator this year. Liam Cohen was one and done. The year before it was Dave Canales who was one and done. You know, they've both gone on to be head coaches immediately. You know, he's on his fourth offensive coordinator in as many years. Yes, the QB and the receiver pairing that he's in is the same, but there's not consistency in the offense in any way, shape or form. You know, they're not going to be bringing in a guy who is going to change the style of the team completely and not take advantage of what they've got. You know, he chose to stay on a smaller contract. He clearly likes what they're going to be doing this year in theory. But it is interesting that how much he turned down from other teams, reportedly, to stay on a team with a new offensive coordinator because of how much he got along with the other people in his position room and the guy calling the offense at the QB position. I think that sort of shows a great deal of sort of credit to Mike Evans and Baker Mayfield. Of course, there are other receivers in the league. Could have gone to new teams this window, decided to extend. You look at the Bills; they've managed to keep Khalil Shakir on a 4-year deal, up to $60 million for him. Bengals tagged T. Higgins; he's not going anywhere. Colts, they're keeping Doolin. I think one of the bigger names, teams managing to keep a receiver, something that I don't think we expected them to necessarily keep. Chiefs have re-signed Brown to a 1-year deal for up to $11 million, and really impressive from the Chiefs this season, this free agency window really. You looked at where they were cap space at the beginning of it, you looked at how many big name free agents they had. Everyone sort of thought, well, hang on, not necessarily the end of a dynasty, but are they going to be struggling a little bit here? How are they going to manage to keep all of their big players? Through a little bit of cap wizardry and contract management, they've actually managed to keep quite a few of their big names. We'll start with the important position. They've kept their punter. He's not going anywhere. And then if we move sort of to defense, Nick Bolton, big name free agent, one of the top two
huge name
linebackers available in this window, sticking around. And then we thought, if Nick Bolton's staying, maybe that means that Trey Smith is gone. Well, he got tagged, so he's managed to stay. So really impressive team building from the Chiefs to keep their two biggest names entering free agency and to still feel sort of relatively comfortable with the cap.
They've kept hold of their youngest free agents as well. I think that's the kicker. Obviously, they lost Joe Tooney to the Bears via trade, but that's the thing where they're wanting to get rid of the older players to make way for the younger generation coming through, to pay Nick Bolton, Trey Smith. There were going to have to be some casualties. I think they've made the right choice in investing in youth on the offensive line, and cashing in while they still can on the older offensive linemen that potentially, I think next year, I think his contract was up, wasn't it? So I think it makes sense.
I think the Trey Smith one's the important one to still keep an eye on as well, because yes, they've tagged him, but I kind of expect a deal to be worked out, especially with the amount that the Chiefs have been able to kind of rearrange their cap space. I think it's going to be quite interesting, at least, to see if they do, because I think if they don't, it kind of, with obviously getting rid of Tooney as well, do they start rebuilding that offense a little bit more around the trenches? Obviously, they've got receivers there as well, but I don't think any Chiefs receiver has really been able to kind of, be that spotlight player since Tyreek Hill. They've kind of had a bit of a revolving door due to kind of issues, injuries, off the field stuff, but it's always been relatively consistent since Hill left in terms of, you've got guys not necessarily putting up absolutely huge numbers, but they're still putting up numbers. So I think this is the way the Chiefs play the game. They invest in the offensive line, they invest in the front seven. It's really one of those things where, yes, they're invested in the youth, but you need to remember they've still got a few older players that can't stay there forever. So I definitely think, at least for the Chiefs, the lines are something to really keep an eye on moving forwards.
So mentioned Trey Smith there with the Chiefs. Of course, plenty of other linemen on both sides of the ball this year. They seem to receive sort of quite big contracts. I think looking at the line compared to other positions, it was really sort of teams investing in the trenches on both sides. If we just look at some of the names that received big contracts, Trey Smith, Jalen Moore, Ronnie Stanley, Will Fries, Dan Moore Jr. You want to have a look at the defense, Myles Garrett, Max Crosby, Milton Williams, Javon Kinlaw, Jonathan Allen. There really is a sort of extensive list of big guys who got paid on both sides of the line this year.
Yeah, there really is, and I think one of the interesting things that I've noticed about kind of some of these big guys is age isn't seeming to be a factor necessarily in how much people are getting paid, especially on the line, because as you develop as a player, obviously you become a bit smarter. You might not be as agile as you used to be, but it's one of those where it doesn't really affect the offensive line and defensive line as much as it affects other positions. You mentioned Ronnie Stanley there. He's 31 years old and he signed a 3-year deal for $60 million. That's not a small contract at all for someone who's getting on in age there. Um, it goes both ways though. You've got Dan Moore Jr., who's relatively young at 26, signing 4 years, 82 million. It's really kind of all across the board. Like you said, these big contracts are coming out, and I think it goes to show, really, and I don't know if it's the Eagles' effect, but having an offensive line that can protect you is it's always been so important. But in the age now where, you know, just looking at some of the defensive play, you've got a Josh Sweat, Khalil Mack re-signed, obviously Joey Bosa's gone to the Bills. Some of these big guys on defense, they're really good, but the offensive line at the minute is, you know, I'm preferring offensive line play at the minute to defensive line, at least for some of the older guys.
Yeah, I'll say I completely agree with that, and I think it does show that cyclical nature of the NFL. That obviously last year was a massive year for running backs. Defense and offenses are reacting to what's working in the NFL, and that's driving the market up a considerable amount compared to how much like cornerbacks and safeties are getting paid this off season. The big teams are looking at where the better teams are investing in, and kind of just following suit, really.
I think it's, you look at the upcoming draft class, and I wondered whether the quality of that had an impact on free agency. You look at some of the offensive linemen who got contracts, Jalen Moore, Dan Moore Jr., and this is anything against them, they're both fantastic players, but I don't think people in other years would expect them to get the size of contracts that they did to play tackle for these teams. But then if you look at the upcoming draft class, it's considered a sort of not as flashy class for the offensive line.
There's definitely a disparity for me, at least, in some of these contracts that the interior O-line and tackles are getting, as opposed to kind of the edge rushers and interior D-line guys are getting, because of the draft. Like you said, I do think it's influencing it, especially for these tackles, man. Dan Moore Jr. getting $80 million on a 4-year deal for a guy that, for all of his passing stats was kind of in this range of kind of like the 60th best offensive lineman. Getting $80 million just shows, I think, how there are very few guys that can be considered true tackles in this upcoming class, and teams don't necessarily want to take a chance on them at tackle.
So, enough sort of general chit-chat about the headlines, the big names, what has and hasn't happened in free agency. What we've all done is we've all gone away, we've had a little look at what's happened, picked a winner and a loser from this free agency class. It can be a player, can be a team, can be a coach, sort of a general side of the ball. And then we're just going to sort of dive into it on a bit more of a sort of deeper level and sort of share our ideas with each other based on people we think are going to come out of this free agency well, and people who are sort of thinking, given another chance, I'd like to give that another go, do it a bit differently. If we go to Lockwood first, if you're ready.
Yeah, so my winner's the Chicago Bears. So building off of what we were just literally talking about with the spending on offensive line, they've just identified the errors of last season and thrown hell of a lot of money at it. They've signed 2 guards and a centre already in Joey Jackson, Joe Tooney, and Drew Dahlman. They've just completely reinvented their offensive line. They've still got 2 rookie tackles or 2 young tackles on either side that are able to, improve with an improved interior offensive line. And they're just protecting the prize asset in Caleb Williams back there. He threw himself for a couple of them, but most of his sacks were through just poor offensive line play, and they've really just invested in it, but left it open potentially for him to even go and draft another guard in the upcoming NFL draft, because there are plenty of good guards. Yeah, we were talking about the lack of strength in the tackle class. There are a lot of labelled tackles that are probably going to play guard when it comes to the NFL draft, and they could probably fill in and in the same model as the Eagles, be that backup, like sit for a year or two behind someone like a Joe Tooney, who's probably only got a year or two left in him, and then come in and replace him in a couple of years. So they've got that constant turn. I think even flipping it to the other side of the ball, they signed Grady Jarrett on a big deal as well. That one was for $43.5 million for 3 years. I think, again, they struggled with pass rush, and they've gone out and signed a pass rushing defensive tackle who has been really, as much as I hate to say this, has been really good for the Falcons over his time in Atlanta. So I think for me, the Bears are the big winner in free agency. They've really just loaded up, and obviously they had a lot of hype last off season, but they've really just doubled down on their weaknesses, and I'm ready to buy in for them again this year.
Don't do that, because
probably gonna get stoned. But
they got the three-peat before the Chiefs as the off-season champions. But listen, they did the right thing 100%. You look at how many sacks that O-line gave up last year. I mean, as a Pats fan, they gave up 9 sacks when we played them. 9.
Yeah.
I'm not sure about kind of what you said about kind of building up with kind of the way the Eagles are, because I still don't think that front office is built like the Eagles front office. There's no front office built like that. It's ridiculous, but they're ready to compete, I think, especially on offense. You probably still need a couple of defensive pieces, but man, I know we're not talking about the draft necessarily, but Ashton Jeanty there for you at 10 with that interior O-line. Your tackles are semi-decent. You could maybe kind of invest in one, but they're good enough. That's a dangerous offense with Ben Johnson.
It's funny the way that you two are talking about them and talking about the Bears and how good that they could potentially be.
No. I'm not in on the Bears at all. I think they're going to flop. But
the way that you've got them as your winner for all these reasons, I almost picked Caleb as my loser for the same reasons. Last year, you talked about already, those 68 sacks that they gave up. That's a huge excuse. You shouldn't use excuses in the NFL, but that's a massive reason for why the play was like it was. But you now look at the line they've got, immediately a far superior line. They've gone out, they've addressed it, they've done a good job. He's still got DJ Moore, Roma Dunes there at receiver. Cole Kmet's a good tight end. They could go get another one in the draft. They've got DeAndre Swift at the moment. They could go, as you mentioned, get Ashton Jeanty in the draft. I don't think they're done upgrading this offense.
No.
If this offense doesn't work in the next 2 or 3 years, bearing in mind they've got the hottest head coach candidate from the last 3 head coaching cycles. They've got Ben Johnson now. If it doesn't work out for Chicago in these next sort of few seasons, you can't turn around and say, oh, well, such and such wasn't good enough. That wasn't good enough.
No, you can't.
There is now a great deal of pressure on Caleb.
If the Bears want a over 4,000 yard passer in the next 10, 15 years, they have to protect Caleb Williams. I think Caleb Williams probably is the player to do that in Chicago. Looking at their past quarterbacks, like Caleb Williams is probably the player to get him a 4,000 yard season, but he can't do that if he's laid flat on his back, which he spent at least half this season doing so, or running away from pressure.
Yeah, and There were flashes of him. Obviously, he didn't get that Offensive Rookie of the Year. That obviously went to the number 2 pick. If they can limit those sacks, he can definitely get the yards there with the receiver room they've got. For me, just kind of going on to their offense as a whole, Odunze was a little bit of a disappointment for me, at least. I expected a little bit more out of him, but how much can you really do with an offensive line that is not protecting your young quarterback whilst he's still having to learn the NFL? You saw that with the top 3 teams that took quarterbacks last year. The Commanders' O-line was, better than the other 2 in the Patriots and the Bears, but all these teams had terrible O-lines, and it's weird. It feels like this has been done the wrong way around.
I mean, it's not like it's a new thing. You look at the year before.
No, it's not.
You look at the Panthers. They took Bryce Young. Bryce Young got crucified near enough in his first season.
He was almost written off completely.
Yeah, and then they turn around, went and spent as much as they did on 2 top-tier guards, and by the end of Bryce Young's second season, you didn't recognise him from that first year. It sounds obvious how much having a good O-line can help your offense, but you really see it. These young guys learning the league, learning things that are different from how they are in college. You need to have experienced, solid trench play in front of them, and everything starts to slot together.
Yeah, and I'll move on to my winner now. And it might be a little bit hypocritical because of the hat that I'm wearing, but I'm moving on from one team with a rookie quarterback that have really kind of overhauled their offense. I kind of wanted us to overhaul our offense, but really kind of the Patriots defense are massive winners for me, at least in this draft. We've really kind of splashed the cash. We had around about $130 million in cap space, and pretty sure we spent around about 100 million of it. Just to kind of talk through a couple of the signings, you've got outside linebacker Harold Landry, we signed before the legal kind of tampering process started. The big one is Milton Williams there. We did Devon Godshaw, so we got rid of defensive linemen, and then we have we overpaid for one? We'll see. We probably have, but it's been spoken about a lot. Do players want to come to the Patriots? Maybe not, but we've got all this money to kind of splash about. A couple of other signings, middle linebacker like Robert Spillane, 3-year deal again. This guy is really kind of Mike Vrabel-esque. He's really kind of hard downhill. Juwan Bentley's then entering a contract year. And, I've liked Spillane for a while. He's a sure tackler, which is really what we need coming from a team that's run defense was just absolutely awful. And then probably the one that I think, at least from what I've seen, is really kind of gone under the radar a little bit is Carlton Davis to a 3-year deal. $60 million. He's, you're pairing up Carlton Davis with a shutdown corner like Christian Gonzalez. You stick Marcus Jones or something in the slot or the nickel. That's a scary DB room. You've got Jabril Peppers in the backfield. You figure out what you're doing with strong safety because Kyle Duggar wasn't really all that last year. Someone like Mike Vrabel come in clearly has a bigger influence than Gerard Mayo had, and they have just absolutely splashed the cash. Now, I'm interested to see what you guys think. For me, yes, I think we probably paid a little bit more than we should have done for the Milton Williams, but the fact that it's in the rough estimate of around 60 million guaranteed for 4 years, I really don't mind it that much. Obviously, it's dependent on stats, showing up, and really kind of with the fact that we could be lacking Barmore. I'm crossing my fingers saying that we're not. Hope he's healthy, but to me, this is kind of he is the winner of free agency so far with that contract. But I'll pass it over to you guys, see what you think.
It's an interesting one. The players you've got, I like the players. They're great players. You've had to do what I think everyone expected you to do a little bit, and that is throw the cash around.
Yeah.
You know, the deal that you've spent on Milton Williams, I think it's like up there in like top 3 D
He's
tackles
top
in terms of
3.
amount of money he's going to be making.
Well, he's top 3 in highest paid Patriots of all time.
Yeah. So
which is wild.
But, you know, according to reports, he was really close to signing to another team. Now I can't remember which team it was. You know, we're not going to go in on that. But you know, he was close to going to another team, and you've had to pay him over what he probably was expecting to get to make sure that you could bring him in. But you had to do that. You know, you look at how bad the defense was. You've got a young QB who needs a good defense to lean on. You know, you've got good players, and you were fortunate enough to have the cap space to go out there and overspend on them. If you were a little bit more cash strapped, you know, I'm not saying Saints bad, but if you had sort of closer to the 60 mark rather than the 130 mark, then I think I'd be a lot more critical and a lot more sort of upset with how you've spent the money.
Yeah.
But for what
100%.
you've had, I think you've done a good job.
Yeah, and I think you touched on it towards the end, Joe. Like Christian Barmore coming back, if he does end up coming back from the blood clots, it's almost like another signing, considering they didn't play last year.
He came back for one game last year and then had to go again because he just wasn't ready. But I'll just throw this up at you. And I discussed it with you before, but I'm just going to say it again. Milton Williams, Christian Barmore, Harold Landry / Keon White, Abdul Carter. And now tell me that's not a bully of a defensive line right there.
Oh,
it's a beautiful defensive line.
It's not happening.
Yeah.
It's not happening though.
We love delusion. Delusion's fantastic. Keep dreaming.
Yeah, but it's more like it's more likely to happen than you getting him.
I mean, you've seen what our front office will do. We love throwing away.
Yeah, we know the
Panthers
love
just to get up to 1.
But you know, I'm happy. And we did a couple of things on the offensive side of the ball. I won't go into it in as much detail. We signed Mac Hollins to a 2-year deal worth up to $10.4 million. And then finally we signed Morgan Moses as well at right tackle. Not the tackle that we necessarily needed, but it kind of bolsters up that offensive line that really needs that help.
I think what's impressive about the group of guys you've brought in is you've clearly gone in with a plan on defense and what you wanted to do, and it now leaves you in a relatively sort of not simple but easier position going into the draft. A week ago
you're going to go offense heavy.
Yeah, a week ago we were looking at the draft and thinking, what are the Patriots going to do here? They could go a number of different ways. You've now got a very clear list of things that you need based on what you've addressed in free agency. You've done a good job there, and I think it's now going to make the draft process a lot more streamlined and simple for you guys, knowing who you need to go or what types of players you need to now go and get, and where to be aggressive, where you can afford to trade back. I think you've made the entire front office's job there far more easy. Moving on to my chosen winner, I've gone a little bit different with it. I've picked a player who's not moved, contract wasn't even up, but I've gone for someone who I think they've sort of won based on what the team has and hasn't signed and where they've gone. My winner is Panthers rookie linebacker Trevin Wallace. Looking at him last year, drafted 72nd overall in the 3rd round out of Kentucky. I think consensus at the time was that's a bit early for him. A lot of people were thinking he was sort of a more 4th to 5th round guy, myself included. I was like, I'm happy we've got a linebacker position of need, but I think I'd have preferred another player at that pick. If we were going Trevin Wallace, I think we could have waited a little bit later. Due to injuries on our defense last year, he actually ended up playing a fair bit. Played in 13 games, started 8 of them, which, as a rookie, to start middle backer for that many games, particularly when you weren't expected to, really quite impressive. 2 forced fumbles, finished with total 64 tackles, which in the games he played, that's a good number of tackles to have. QB hit, a couple of TFLs in there. For what he was, he really sort of looked a lot more impressive than we were expecting him to. And I think it shows that Panthers GM, ex-linebacker himself, Dan Morgan, really understands the position, as you'd expect, and really found someone that he believes could be, the next sort of guy in that long list of Panthers greats at the linebacker position. And looking at our depth chart this time round, before free agency, we let Shaq Thompson go. So we've got Josie Jewell, Trevin Wallace. Cool, there's 2 linebackers. After that, we've got Claudin Cherilus, John Rattigan. These are special teamers. They're not.
I don't even know their names.
They're not linebacker 2. So I expect us to go out and either in draft or free agency. And as we're recording, we have just signed Christian Roseboom on a 1-year deal from the Rams. But I still think that that's a prove-it deal, rotation sort of thing. He's not coming in to be, to be the big name there. I think it's also really built up for Trevin Wallace to get even more snaps this year and really cement himself as Panthers linebacker of the future. I'm really excited to see how he plays next year. And if his second year in the scheme, second year in the league, he shows a big jump, really happy, really excited for him.
Yeah, I think you're right there. Obviously, I don't know kind of too much about kind of what's going on with the Panthers internally. Obviously, I've seen the signings that you've made. You've kind of bolstered up that interior D-line a little bit with a couple of your signings. I think it definitely helps Wallace. I mean, I don't know if you mentioned this. How many games did he play?
So he played 13, started 8.
Okay, so he started in 8. So he's aren't bad at all. And obviously is a, 3rd round pick there. You're not expecting necessarily great things right away, but it's definitely a stepping stone. I think, your defense is getting younger now. I think proven with the fact that Shaq Thompson went. Clowney's probably not going to be there for more than a year. Now, probably going to be drafting an edge player or a corner as well. You've got quite a young squad there, and I think really kind of if he can become almost that mouthpiece in that defense, that really just helps him moving forwards. It helps your team, and ultimately as well, is he going to be, Luke Kuechly? Probably not, but
no one's going to be Luke Kuechly.
No, I know. The Panthers have always had kind of really nice players at that linebacker position, at least for me, kind of. So, I'm excited to see what he does. The stage is set for Trevor Wallace to really take the spotlight there in that defense at the moment. So it's whether or not he can grasp it or,
I think looking at the Panthers defense wider as well with the signings they made, obviously they've identified their lack of ability to defend the run. Like you notice that with a lot of the signings, they are the bigger, beefier, better tacklers. Like Trayvon Morig coming in, he buzzes around back at safety and crashes down to the line of scrimmage and makes tackles in the backfield. They have invested in a lot of areas to improve their run defense, but obviously they haven't invested much beyond Roseboom at linebacker, and it shows that trust in a player like Wallace to come in and make that step up in his second year and really become that centerpiece of the defense.
Yeah, like everyone they've brought in, Trevor Morig from the Raiders safety, really good run stopper, and then we're getting down onto the defensive line to Sean Wharton from the Chiefs, Patrick Jones from the Vikings, Bobby Brown from the Rams. We've got run stoppers and we're building pieces around our linebacking core. But the 2 linebackers there, Josie Jewell and Trevin Wallace, they look to sort of mainly have kept their jobs. Look like they're going to be our 2 starters going into next season. And you look at I mentioned before sort of the history of the position at the Panthers. Shaq Thompson, Luke Kuechly, Thomas Davis, um, Dan Morgan, current GM, and then the great Sam Mills. This is, if there is a position that sums up the Carolina Panthers, it's middle linebacker.
Panthers heritage.
I will say I think I agree with what you said for now. I will kind of just say before I fully agree with it, I'm going to wait to see what the draft brings. This whole conversation does kind of go away a little bit if you possibly do go like a Jalen Walker. Granted, I would play him more as an edge player, but I think especially where you are at the number 8 position, if you're picking Jalen Walker, you're picking him for his versatility. Now I don't know really kind of where he would fit in with that, but I think I agree with you for now, dependent on kind of what happens in the draft.
Of course, where you have winners, you are also going to have people who, you'd consider to be losers who haven't come out of free agency as well as they might have hoped. Either of you want to start off with someone you think would like to redo it if they could?
Yeah, I think I'd like to kick that off. Speaking of players staying put, I think one maybe more against his own will than anything else is T. Higgins with the Bengals. Obviously set to be probably the biggest free agent this cycle, and ended up getting tagged by the Bengals for a second time in a row. Obviously, we've seen the series of tweets coming out from himself and his mom. Not straight away bashing the Bengals, but obviously the subtext is there. Even though they might deny it, he definitely isn't happy to be tagged again. He was set to get paid a lot of money, and for an organisation that's not quick to pay people, obviously it's not ideal for him to be staying put in Cincy. Situationally, it probably is one of the best situations he could be in, being the second wide receiver with Jamar Chase and having Joe Burrow at quarterback is a very good, very attractive situation. But they're not rewarding him with a new contract. They're obviously still trying to pay Jamar Chase at this point, and it's just not a great situation for T. Higgins to still be in, especially since yourself, Joe, with the Pats, they probably were going to pay him a lot of money. If they were willing to pay Godwin $90 million, imagine what they would want to pay T. Higgins.
You've listed T. Higgins as a loser. You could list the entire Bengals organization as a loser right now, because what's going to happen with Jamar Chase? You're going to have to pay him a hell of a lot of money, and here you are, a month down the line from talks about bolstering the defense alongside Hendrickson, with Higgins going to make an awful lot of money somewhere, and the possibility that you may draft a receiver too. It is right now. We are going to score more points than you. But you're breaking players. You're breaking players.
It's an absolute sort of disaster class from the Bengals front office on how to team build.
It is.
They've done a fantastic job building that offense. Incredibly potent offense. And then
until now.
They've gone for, right, how do we manage the longevity of it? We don't. Cool, lovely. See you later, lads.
Yeah.
The proven thing that you need to do in today's NFL, bearing in mind contracts and free agency, it's exploding year on year. You look at sort of the highest contract 10 years ago and you look at it now, they don't look comparable at all. The salary cap, that's getting bigger and bigger. 2 years in a row, it's been about a 20 million increase. That's not going to slow down.
Thank you, Taylor Swift.
It's going to be getting bigger and bigger. Players want more and more. As a GM, your job is to decide when to sign players to contract extensions. The successful ones, they're offering these players extensions as early as possible at a fair rate then. The Bengals are leaving it too late. They've got Trey Hendrickson, potentially should have been Defensive Player of the Year. certainly in the conversation for it, and then they've gone, well, we can't really afford you, so you can seek a trade. What? No, pay him when he should have got paid, and you'd have got him for nowhere near what he's worth now. They extended their tight end earlier this free agency. If they somehow manage to extend both these receivers, they will be spending over 50% of their cap on a QB, 2 receivers, and a tight end. That's
It's
not
not
how.
sustainable.
Wild.
That's not
It's
how
not how you build a
cap
team.
space works. No.
For me at least, that's not how the NFL works. That's not how it works anymore. But they're almost treating this, with how late they're leaving things, they're almost treating it like their Super Bowl window is over. Yeah, and I'm going to talk about my loser now. And I'm not going to talk about a singular player. I'm going to talk about an entire team. Speaking about a team being kneecapped, and I just kind of said the Bengals feel like their Super Bowl window might be over with kind of what they're doing. I'm going to tell you a team whose Super Bowl window is completely over. That's the San Francisco 49ers. What on earth have they done? There's a graphic of the amount of players that they've let go or traded or whatever this off season, and who they've kind of added to the roster. I'm just going to kind of read through this graphic right now. Deebo Samuel traded. Dre Greenlaw, free agent, went to the Broncos. Charvarius Ward went to the Colts. Jalen Moore went to the Chiefs. Hufanga went to the Broncos. Aaron Branks went to the Packers. Elijah Mitchell went to the Chiefs. Joshua Dobbs has gone to the Patriots. Siobhan Hargrave has gone to the Vikings. Leonard Floyd to the Falcons. They've released Kyle Juszczyk and they've released Malik Collins, who I believe has just signed for the Browns. They've added DeMarcus Robinson, and that is it. There is still talk that Ayuk might be traded. Apparently, they want a little bit more than teams are willing to give up. But if we've seen anything right now, is that teams are willing to take that little bit less. Look at Cooper Kupp. He's literally just hit free agency. He's put out a tweet. And apparently the Rams wanted higher than a 5th round pick to the point where they had to lower what they wanted to a 5th round pick. If you're lowering what you want at that point, most teams are going to go, well, he's going to be a free agent. If you're willing to get rid of someone that easily, he's going to be a free agent. This team has discovered what it is now going to be like that you have to pay top 10 quarterback money, because that's what they're going to have to do. Brock Purdy is on such a cheap contract right now that they have literally gone from we can win the Super Bowl with a young rookie quarterback to we need to rebuild. I don't understand what they've done. I understand what they've done. They put everything. I feel like they put everything on this past year just gone. And they've ended up with the number 11 pick. And Micah Parsons put it best in a tweet. This is what happens when your quarterback's not a rookie anymore. And they've discovered it. And I hate to say it, I don't see them reaching anywhere near the Super Bowl for a few years at least.
I think that their window is closed for now.
Yeah.
It's not to say that it won't reopen in the future. You've still got a very young quarterback in Brock Purdy. That window has all the potential to open up again, but this iteration of the 49ers, as we know them, have ceased to exist. It's finished now. It's done. They need to pay Brock Purdy, and then they need to restructure the entire team and salary cap around Brock Purdy's contract. That is what this is.
They've gone for 3 of us who are really into kind of draft free agency, that kind of thing. I had them locked in to pick up. You either pick up the best offensive lineman available, or you pick up the best DB available. You've now gone to needing. You need a starting receiver. You need safety, cornerback, nickel, defensive line, offensive line.
And I think it's a similar situation to what we've seen with the Rams, where we've looked at them and gone, well, this roster sucks. They suck. And then in 2 years' time, we're looking at a team that are getting back to the playoffs, putting up defensive rookie of the years, and not flying, but are definitely doing better than a lot of people thought they would a bit further down the line. I think in some aspects you have to trust the process a little bit, and that Kyle Shanahan does know what he's doing when it comes to a roster. But I completely agree that it is probably going to take 2-3 years for them to get anywhere close to back to where they were.
If you think about the 49ers teams of sort of recent times, you've had your flashy Shanahan offense, nice run design, Debo, Ayuk, sort of McCaffrey, nice sort of passing concepts going on. And then you've always had, through what has been nearly a rotating door of defensive coordinators, they've always had a nice defense on the other side as well. And then if you think pre-Shanahan, they were quite a run-first team. They were established themselves as a run-first team.
Yeah.
I've just gone and looked because you mentioned, they've got top 10 QB play now and they're going to have to pay a top 10 QB. I'm looking through like a list of starting quarterbacks of the 49ers, trying to work out when the last time they had a top 10 QB in the league was. Obviously, they've just had two seasons. They've just had 2 seasons of Purdy. They had
Jimmy G.
4 years of Jimmy G. 2 years of Mullins, Bethard, Garoppolo sort of cycling through. Kaepernick. Alex Smith. Sean Hill. Jeff Garcia. And then you get to 1998 was the last Steve Young season. It's 2025, and I think it might be the first time since the 90s that the San Francisco 49ers have had consistent top 10 QB play, and I almost think the team's forgotten how to build around a QB and not around an identity instead.
Shanahan is great, and he will go down as a great. But I can't see him doing what McVay's done. I can't. Because as much as McVay, has rebuilt that team, they've always had kind of a bit of consistency. Granted, Cooper Kupp's going this year. But there's always been some kind of consistency with the Rams. They're going to it now where you said it kind of before we kind of started speaking, Carl. 12 out of the 22 starters from when they were in the Super Bowl aren't there anymore. That's not consistency at all. Especially if the rumors are true and they're looking at getting rid of Ayuk as well. So I think we'll kind of leave it there with those. But like I said, that to me at least, for at least another 4 years, their cycle is kind of done. We might look back in a year and I might be chatting on my arse, but
it's always the case. Always the case.
It's always the case.
Well, whilst we're at it, we'll stick in the NFC West. We'll have a look at my free agency losers. For me, I've gone for a team, or more a side of the ball for a team that I think, coming off last year, sort of really thought they might have a chance to progress and build onto something new, and instead it appears they've just torn it down and decided to start again. So I'm talking about the Seattle Seahawks offense. They're going to have a new QB. They'll have a new offensive coordinator. They've got they're going to have a new receiver number 1, who was previously their 2 or 3, depending on which way you want to look at it. That's a complete overhaul of a team that looked not horrific. Concerningly, the thing they've not overhauled at all was the offensive line, which by about every measurable statistic, analytic, metric, whatever scientific word you want to use, it was trash. I don't like being critical of NFL players because I appreciate NFL players do what I can only dream to have ever done. But that was not a good offensive line last year.
No, not at all.
And then they've hit free agency and they've gone, right, how do we address this? Good. I know what we'll do. We'll trade away our wide receiver number 1. We'll trade away our QB. We'll release our wide receiver 2. And then we'll go sign a QB who is basically the same as the guy we had before, but slightly different. You know, you can debate whether Darnold's better than Geno. Some things that he is, some things he isn't. They've got Darnold on the deal they wanted to give Geno, and they've got a 3rd round pick out of it. So, you know, that's not too bad.
That's a win. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a minor win. I think another minor win, if we're looking at sort of like a personal level, JSN, he's gone from being, you know, the 3rd of 3 very good receivers to now being the notable, true top wide receiver in that room. So I think for him, he's certainly looking at this upcoming year going, good, you know, I'm going to get a lot more production. You know, I think that also means that JSN fantasy owners are possibly winners from this free agency as well.
But are they?
Let's go if you want a quick passing game. Because it's not, as we touched on earlier, this isn't the draft to go and get a new offensive line.
It's not. They've loaded up on draft picks this year.
Yeah.
It's not like they've gone, this is a multi-year thing. They've got, what, a 2nd, a 3rd? They've got another 2nd, another 3rd. They've got 1 in the 1st, so they've got, all in all, within the first 2 days, they've got 5 draft picks.
500 picks, yeah.
It's not good. It's you've got clear issues. You know, you've seen comments that they were in on people like Will Fries, but these past couple of days have probably made people think, do I want to be a part of this? No. You know what? I'm going to be overly critical here. Sam Darnold is not proven.
No.
He is not proven.
No.
He's had 1 good year. Granted, he spent time with the 49ers in a winning culture that went to the Super Bowl. This is a positive. Did he play? No. He's spent time with the Vikings, who had a decent offensive line. You know, they had a couple of issues here and there. He had arguably one of the best, if not the best, 1 and 2 in the league at receiver. You've got TJ Hawkinson there, who, I don't care what anyone says, he's still top 5 tight end in the league to me. They had a defense that we all thought was going to struggle and didn't. He's gone from having essentially the world. Darnold's just gone into a really bad situation. And I think the Seahawks in a year's time might look at this and think, what have we done?
I think the only thing is he potentially marries up with the new offensive coordinator that's over there in Seattle with Clint Kubiak. You know, he was in San Francisco when Darnold was there. He was at the Vikings with Kevin O'Connell. You know, he's been a part of these systems. You know, but if I am Clint Kubiak, I'm probably crying into my Cheerios right now. I've just escaped a dumpster fire in New Orleans. I've moved to a team with a shiny wide receiver 1. You know, all the potential in the world, and we've torn it all down. It's not great.
The only way I can see this working for them, the only way that they're in a position, a similar position to what they were this year, is you draft a receiver in round 1, and you spend 3 of your 4 day 2 picks on offensive linemen. But in the positions that they are at, can they do that? And the starters that are going to be there on day 2 are going to go within the top 40.
I can see trade-ups. They've got enough to package for trade-ups.
They have enough to package for trade-ups, but they do not have the talent on that roster right now after these past couple of days to make me think a trade up is worth it because they've got that many holes to fill now. You know, they've just signed DeMarcus Lawrence. Great, you've got a pass rusher. Your front seven wasn't the issue. Your offensive line was the issue, and you've not done anything to fix it.
If there is a team that needs to hit on multiple starters on day 1 and day 2 to have a hope of a somewhat productive season, it's the Seahawks.
Yeah.
They have to.
And they don't necessarily have the history of drafting incredibly well.
No. Yeah, it's an interesting one, and it makes you wonder: is there something going on, possibly behind the scenes that they need to change? Because you look at what DK went for. DK was turning around and went, I want to go to a contender. I want to go into warm weather, and then he
went to Pittsburgh,
which is definitely not warm
one of the coldest
weather.
Places.
And probably not a contender.
Is only a contender because Mike Tomlin is going to will them to a 500 record and scrape them into the playoffs. If that's your definition of a contender, then yes, technically. But they're not. I don't know what to make of it. I'm assuming they have a plan and they've not just missed on every player they went for. But yeah,
you would hope.
It feels like it's not going to be a continuation of the same Sam Darnold we saw in Minnesota, through no fault of his own. But if we link it back to what we're saying about other teams, we talked about Drake May, we talked about Caleb Williams, briefly touched on it with Bryce Young. Yes, they're young rookie QBs. The same thing still applies for a veteran QB. You need an O-line.
Yeah.
Especially for one that's not... you've just mentioned those 3 guys there. They're all more mobile than Sam Darnold. They can all kind of manoeuvre a little bit better.
We've talked on how well Darnold did in Minnesota. Obviously, he did lose 4 games. Twice to the Lions. What was the other team that he lost to twice?
The Rams.
The Rams. Now, I know that it's not just on a QB's fault that you lose games of football. However, what team are they is he going to have to play twice? Now he's on a worse offense. It's the Rams.
At least he gets to play the 49ers.
Well, yeah. Going to be an interesting season.
It is.
Very much so.